again, everyone. Welcome back to another segment of Opera for Us. This is part 2. My name is Denise Nicole Battle, and this series involves where I break down traditional opera stories and tie them into popular Black films and shows. Today's series we will be talking about is interesting. It's one of my favorites, and the movie that I chose is also a classic of mine. We will be talking about Giacomo Puccini's Madame Butterfly. Giacomo Puccini was the composer who composed Madame Butterfly. And we will be correlating that with the movie Jungle Fever.
I give up. It's not worth it.
I mean, it's not worth it. I don't love you.
Jungle Fever is a 90s film, but I really saw some similarities in relation to the plot with Jungle Fever with Madame Butterfly. So without further ado, let's get into it. Madame Butterfly is one of those fictional stories that I think every woman can relate to. It's a beautiful setting and a beautiful, it's very passionate, but it's also extremely sad because it talks about how a woman gives of herself. She changes her whole life in favor of a man who doesn't really love her, and he doesn't care about her the way she may care about him. And so in turn, she gets heartbroken. He can still go on with his merry way, but she suffers the consequences of heartbreak, but also shame, isolation, and hopelessness and depression at the end of the day. So Madame Butterfly starts off, it is in Nagasaki Harbor, in the Nagasaki Harbor of Japan. And it is a military area. And you have Lieutenant Pinkerton and you have Cho-Cho-san. Lieutenant Pinkerton is a Navy lieutenant, Navy officer, whatever you call it. Cho-Cho-san is a geisha. And a geisha traditionally in Japan is a woman who is groomed to provide entertainment, music, dancing, singing, and she also converses with tourists and people who come to see her perform. Geisha does not mean she is a prostitute. I had to re-educate myself on the term geisha and where that came from. But in the story, the geisha, Cho-Cho-san as a geisha, she is married to Lieutenant Pinkerton because the way the story is set up, Lieutenant Pinkerton is stationed in Japan and he rents a house where it comes with 3 servants, a geisha wife, and the house contract he can rent on a monthly basis for 999 years, y'all. 999 years. I've never heard of that, and I think that's quite preposterous. But anywho, this is fiction. So Lieutenant Pinkerton has this house that he rents. Meanwhile, Cho-Cho-san, who was very young at the time, let's say she's about 15, 16, she basically changes her whole lifestyle to accommodate him. She's coming from a place, Cho-Cho-san, let's say she comes from a family a 2-parent household. At one point, her family was very powerful in the country, but there was a situation that happened where they lost it. So her father had committed suicide, but her parents, I'm not sure if her mom remarried or not, but her parents and her family had continued on the tradition. And in the storyline, it says that her family were Buddhist. And so they had their way of life. And also traditionally, geishas were not married. And you study the geisha culture, or when you study about the geisha culture, geishas, if they decide to get married, they have to quit their lifestyle because geishas, this is like a complete devotion of your life to art and entertainment. So anyway, moving forward with the story, Cho-Cho-san basically changes her lifestyle. She converts from Buddhism to Christianity, and she's under the impression her life is completely changed. She's going to marry this man. This man loves her, right? Lieutenant Pinkerton has ulterior motives. I'm not going to say he doesn't care at all about Cho-Cho-san, but he's at a point of his life where he's exploring life. He's, dipping and dabbling here, seeing, where his riches take him. He's a young single man at this moment. So he's like, I can do whatever the heck I want to do. Meanwhile, he has a mentor, or the story calls an American consul, that basically tells him, bro, you need to slow down because this girl you're about to marry, she's young, impressionable, and she's in this for the long haul. And Lieutenant Pinkerton makes it known to his mentor that I'm not here for the long haul. I'm going to marry an American woman later on. I'm just taking care of my needs right now, and when it's time to go, I'm out. So Cho-Cho-san meets him without going into a whole bunch of extra detail, because I do want to go into detail, but I want to keep it brief. So with Cho-Cho-san, when she meets Lieutenant Pinkerton, she brings her family. They're like, oh, this is the American general. You're going to have a great life, yada, 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 yada. And they don't know that she converted to Christianity, okay? Like I said, her ancestral religion, as it mentioned in the story, is Buddhism. So her family, they're Buddhists, and they have a certain way of life that they worship and how they go about their life. She privately tells Pinkerton that she did this, and he's like, okay, great, that's wonderful. Whole time still does not care as deeply for her as she does him. So they arrange to get married. They have, like, I guess a ceremony or whatever, and her uncle finds out, or comes in, basically. Let's imagine like a wedding, and you have that crazy relatives that just says whatever they want. They just talk out the side of their mouth. So he finds out that Cho-Cho-san converted to Christianity, and he tells her family, and so her family's like, you betrayed yourself, basically compromised who you were for this man. So they disown her. And so she has isolation from them. After that instance, they isolate her. Lieutenant Pinkerton was like, man, he kicks them out the house. He said, man, forget about them. You with me, it's okay. Whole time, he can kill rocks. He gets on my nerves. They end up making love, and the scene fast forwards over to 3 years later. And this is where it gets interesting. So I'm continuing this story with the second part of the story is 3 years later. Pinkerton, he's away in America, and he hasn't came back. He left after him and Cho-Cho-san got together, or they got married. But in reality, like I said, he was still going to go back to America, marry somebody else, and eventually come back and start a new life. So Cho-Cho-san, these 3 years have gone by. She's still believing that her husband is coming back for her husband. And in Japanese culture, because Lieutenant Pinkerton abandoned her, in a sense, because he did, that's seen as divorce. Her marriage is annulled. So she gets approached by a wealthy man who is Japanese as well. She doesn't have to change who she is. She can be Cho-Cho-san. She doesn't have to change religions. She can be herself. He will marry her for her. Versus Lieutenant Pinkerton, she kind of changed. So her servant, as I want to call her right-hand woman, Suzuki, kind of hints to her like, I don't think he's coming back. Are you sure you want to stay committed to him? Because he's just left you, girl. It's been 3 years. Like, I don't know about you, but if my man was quote unquote deployed back home and I hadn't heard from him, no letters, I had no type of correspondence, he's left you. But she has hope. She said, no, he would never do that. We're going to solidify everything in the States when he returns. Whole time, Lieutenant Pinkerton marries a wife, an American wife at that. His mentor, the consul, is still in Japan. So he, is seeing what's going on. He tries to warn Cho-Cho-san because Lieutenant Pinkerton is coming back. But this time he's coming back with Becky. And Cho-Cho-san doesn't know this, obviously. So his mentor, American consul, tries to tell her, like, look, you need to marry this Japanese suitor, or you need to get a better life, because this man is, I hate to break it to you, but he's married. He's moved on with his life. And Cho-Cho-san has a son. They have a son together. Like, after their marriage night or whatever, she conceived a son that she named Trouble. And she said when he comes back, when Pinkerton comes back, the boy's father, she's going to rename him Joy. Really interesting. So Pinkerton comes back. Initially, he doesn't see Cho-Cho-san. They don't see each other initially. But she sees the ship coming in. Like the day before she saw him, she saw the ship come in. She's like, oh my gosh, my husband's back. And Suzuki is probably back of her head like, here we go again. So she tells the suitor, the wealthy Japanese man, I'm good. I don't care. I'm already betrothed to someone. Whole time that person doesn't even care about her. So he comes back. And to make a long story short, because this can go on, Cho-san spots his wife, and her name is Kate, in the garden when they come back. This woman devoted her whole life to this butthole, this man who betrayed her, who knowingly betrayed her. He deserts her, and she finds out that not only did he not correspond with her, but supposedly wrote her a letter that he's basically breaking the news to her that I'm married now. And yeah.
È palese, e Pinkerton lo sa.
No,
I mean, she doesn't want to entertain the thought. She doesn't listen to what his mentor and her right-hand woman, Suzuki, is trying to tell her. Cho-Cho-san, eventually what happens when she finds out, she sees the wife and she puts two and two together. And the wife is basically coming in to take the son with her and Pinkerton back to America. And that's just even more trifling. Like, you weren't even involved in this situation. You coming into my life, taking my child back with his father, and what am I supposed to do? Because she was dependent on Pinkerton financially. Like, they were basically almost in poverty. And so she, again, had to have the option of what she was going to do, but she's thinking everything's okay. So without going into the depths of it, I want to just briefly summarize the ending. The son goes back with his father. It's when Pinkerton sees the son, he's like, oh my gosh, I have a son. But he also sees Cho-Cho-san, who, you know, is devastated. And of course, he's going to try to do what a dog does, tries to sympathize and say, I'm sorry, but it's too late. The girl killed herself. She said, you know what? I'd rather kill myself than live in shame. So she sees it. So I'm not sure what happened with the son and Kate Pinkerton and Lieutenant Pinkerton, but I'm sure he went on to go with his father to America and his stepmom. So they go off to America and Cho-Cho-san is dead, child. She dead. Okay, so now let's get into the correlation of jungle fever. You got jungle fever. He's got jungle fever. They've got jungle fever. We're in love. Hey! I associate Jungle Fever with Madame Butterfly because it talks about two different cultures coming together. And the man was trifling as well in the movie, taking advantage of a situation where he was not in love. And you see the isolation, you see the betrayal, you see how the manifestation of a wrong decision can affect multiple people. So without further ado, let's get into Jungle Fever.
She look good. You got any money?
That's my lover. What are you doing?
You have been cast out of your home.
Will you listen to me?
Like Jonah was cast out of the belly of the whale.
Jungle Fever is a Spike Lee joint. Spike Lee is one of my favorite directors, by the way. His movies are very interesting, but they're also very introspective. So Jungle Fever, you have Flipper, who is a married black man, very successful. He is in an architect firm. I don't know if I said that right. He's an architecture firm, and he has a temporary assistant that works with him who is an Italian-American woman. Her name is Angie. Flipper, like I said, is married to a biracial woman named Drew, and they have a child. It starts off the movie, you know, they're making love, you know, all that, and then the movie segues into him working into his setting of his job. And so Flipper starts working later at night, and Angie, being his temporary assistant, works alongside with him late at night. And you know what they say, after 12 o'clock, ain't nothing open but 7-Eleven and Legs. And you know darn well there weren't no 7-Elevens up there in New York. So him and Angie start this affair. They start sleeping together, and Flipper tells his homie, his best friend.
I cheated on Drew.
I'm seeing somebody.
You too, Tyra?
Who are you seeing?
Oh.
I thought you were gonna drop a bomb.
And what is he, like blonde, blue-eyed surfer type?
Hey, dude.
Right?
She's white.
He's like, bro, you can't do this. Angie tells her girlfriend, she makes them like pinky promise when she's first seeing Flipper, when they're first messing around. You know, I'm dating somebody and he's black, and they're like, wait, what? You know, and around that time in that time period, you know, interracial love very much, of course, was happening, but it was still getting accepted, I think, in my opinion, fully from mainstream media. So Spike Lee showcased how racism plays a part into culture, but also how cultures, they're still affecting negatively and positively. Flipper, you see this man, he's a married black man, successful. He has everything going for him. Angie, on the other hand, she's engaged to her Italian fiance. So I'm not sure if she was in love, but girl saw a black man, she was like, I want to dip in the Kool-Aid, see what that's about. Flipper wanted to try some pasta and see what that's about. But unfortunately, that led to a big old mess. You know what I'm saying? Just like Madame Butterfly, Flipper was married. Pinkerton, at the time when he met Cho-Cho-san, although he was not married, he still engaged with her, knowing his intentions were not to be in love with her, were not to be with her long. Flipper engaged with Angie because it was something new, and he was like, his intentions weren't to be with her long. It was just something different. So Flipper's wife finds out, and also Flipper's friend Cyrus, I associate that with Pinkerton's mentors, Pinker's consul, the guy that he goes to, that holds him accountable for things. And his consul tells him, like, don't get involved with Cho-Cho-san. She's young. She's, you know, devoting her whole life to you. Flipper's best friend Cyrus tells him, like, bro, you need to cool that out. Like, it's one thing to cheat on your wife, but, you know, it's a white woman. So, yeah, and I see those similarities between the two stories. Also, both families on both sides of the characters. So Flipper's side, you know, he comes from he's an all black man, even though his wife is biracial. His parents are black. They come from the church.
You had to eventually go get yourself a white girl, didn't you?
What do you mean eventually?
What a tramp, what a slut.
Do you know there's only one thing he could possibly want from her?
You gonna give her a beating?
My father did that already.
Angie's family is Italian, and they're very much against interracial relationships. They're not even big fans of black people. You know, they'll listen to the music, but they don't bang with it. So when Flipper's family finds out, and his wife Drew finds out, and Drew being biracial, it makes her think, is the reason you got with me was because I'm half white, because you're cheating on me with a white woman. And it just causes her to really, you know, take things into perspective, like, what is this all about? What is your motive? You know, I'm sorry, because eventually he tries to go back to her, but she ain't letting him back home. So his family is one thing. Again, they're like, you cheating, you going against the Bible, but a white woman. So his family ostracizes him. Pinkerton, you know, he was an American, so he kind of had the upper hand. Versus Cho-Cho-san, her family initially was very embracive because they were under the pretense, okay, she's in love. Where things got murky was when they found out she changed her religion for Pinkerton. So she changed who she was to be with this man. And Angie's family, they weren't concerned about her motive. They were like, you're having sex with a black man. Like, You committed the cardinal sin. What is wrong with you? And I, for one, am a component of love who you love. If that's somebody that makes your heart flutter, it doesn't matter what color they are, gender, socioeconomic status, culture. If you love that person, be with that person because you love them, okay? You know, they were disgusted with her. So her father was already abusive towards Angie. He starts beating on her and abusing her, and her brothers, you know, her family just ostracizes her. So that's what happens with Cho Cho San when her family finds out she converts to a different religion. So in the movie Jungle Fever, Angie and Flipper move into an apartment together. And they're trying to make things work, but eventually, y'all, it's not working. Because it's one thing to have the foundation on what their relationship was started on, but then interracial love was still being accepted by mainstream media. You know, wasn't more so showing the love part or the romance, but he wanted to highlight how cultures are affected, how people's situations are affected morally, and just bring out the dynamic with those topics.
You got with me in spite your family because you were curious about black.
Is that what you think it was?
Yeah, I do.
So, unlike Cho Cho San, Angie doesn't get pregnant because her and Flipper talk about that. Like, you know, if we get pregnant, this is what's going to happen. Our children are going to be ostracized. It just doesn't make any sense. And eventually they tell each other, well, Flipper makes it known that, you know, I didn't love you. I didn't get in this for love. I was just curious. And I think you were just curious as well, you know? So the blacker the berry, the sweeter the juice. That's all I'm saying. Anywho, that's my relation so far of what I have with Jungle Fever and Madame Butterfly. These are also abridged versions of my take on the traditional opera story and the movies. I'm not on the traditional opera story and the movies. I'm not going to spill every single detail, but my hope is just bringing together highlights, important points from both the opera and the movie, and showing similarities between the two. So if you like what you see, if you want to see more, please subscribe to my channel, like, share, and comment on this video. Send it to your friends, send it to your family, share it to everyone on your social media platforms, because I'm just trying to get the word out. My goal is to do everything in my power to expose as many people in my circle and beyond to opera. I don't want any more Black and brown people not to be exposed to opera, because we have so much accessible to us on YouTube, on social media, and a lot of people don't know. So my goal is just to drive people there, bring this art form to them right where they are, meet you where you are, and hopefully in turn you become interested, you want to attend an opera in person, and you understand the importance of opera in our community and in our world. So thank you all so much. I look forward to diving in with Opera for Us Part 3. And thank you guys again so much. I look forward to diving in again for Opera for Us. I look forward to going in for Part 3 of Opera for Us. And this next story is another good one. And it involves another Spike Lee joint. I'm going to be recycling some Spike Lee movies for these. So thank you all so much for tuning in. Have a wonderful day. Bye.